So I think the reason that you see success in people that solve their own problem is because you can have conviction behind it, right? If I say, I'm going to build this thing for doctors and I'm not a doctor, like maybe the opportunity is huge. Maybe it's a great market. Maybe I can sell it, right? Like all those things are possible, but I can't have conviction that what I'm building is the right thing. So for us, we just had that deep conviction. Like we knew every step of the way, like I want this to work this way.
I've seen lack of conviction kill companies. I've seen it firsthand, where it's like, oh, let's jump to the next thing that we're not fully convicted in, right?
Let's pivot again and pivot and pivot. And I hate the word. Like you just have to have some conviction and do something.
Huge. Welcome. This is Peter Voogd, founder of the prestigious Game Changers Academy, and thanks for tuning into our monthly Millionaire video series where we interview the world's most elite and successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, entertainers, and real game changers, and people that I personally have massive respect for, people that are making a difference, not just in their industries, but in the world. And I'm super excited for today's call because it's somebody that has walked the walk for a long time and someone that has truly built and deserved to have a life that he lives on his terms. And trust me, he's earned it. David Hauser, who's an entrepreneur, speaker, and angel investor. Now, you guys know about him. You've seen the stats. You've checked out the articles and the videos that we sent. But he sold his company, Grasshopper, for $176 million in 2015. He is the definition of a serial entrepreneur and even a founding member of the National Entrepreneurs Day. He's co-founded a member of a ton of different companies. He's an angel investor that invests in startup. He's been in all kinds of huge publications, Forbes, Entrepreneur, and everyone you can think of. And his recent book, Unstoppable, released September last year and has become a bestseller. And it's something that I strongly recommend you guys check out. We'll talk about it today. But thank you so much, man, for taking the time to speak to our game changers. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm glad that we could do the call.
You had a long list of accolades. I didn't want to read them all, so I posted them below. So I'm not going to, they already know about them. So here's what I want to start with, man. It was fascinating talking to you earlier, and there's some things that I don't think a lot of people know that will blow their minds in terms of when you sold your company and the exit strategy. We'll talk about that. But anytime someone hears that someone sells a company for 50 million, 100 million, 500 million, a billion, then there's a million entrepreneurs that just want to start companies and become tech entrepreneurs and sell it right away. A lot of people think that you just became a millionaire overnight, but the reality is it was 12 years of bootstrapping and hustle and grind. So before we dive into your story and tips that you're going to give and advertising and all kinds of things we're going to hit on, can you please talk about some of the sleepless nights and the times when you thought about giving up and the struggles and the frustrations throughout building Grasshopper to what it was when you sold it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what's really interesting is like, yeah, we all see like the news headlines, right? Like someone sold for a lot of money or, something was great, right? And, we forget that it, like for us, it took 12 years. For a lot of people, it takes a very long time. And we always only hear about the successes, right? We don't hear about the failures and the hard parts along the way. And there's lots of them, right? We lost $1 million trying to build out a labs concept where we tried to launch additional companies. And that was a tremendous waste of money and time. There were times when we had no money for payroll and it was like literally, next day trying to get enough money to meet payroll. We overhired and we had way too many people and we didn't have the right culture. And we ended up having to, fire, I think in one day about 12 or 14 people, right? And we did it all the wrong way and we screwed up so many things so many times. There's that side of it. The other side is like, as a bootstrapped company, there was this ongoing struggle where, we felt like we never got press coverage, where our competitors that, we were doing $20 million and there'd be some press coverage on someone doing something like us and they were touting doing $1 million, right? And we're like, are you kidding me? But they had raised money and like it was in a different path, right? And it's this internal struggle where you're like, it's not fair. Why is TechCrunch not covering me when I know that this is a successful business and we're doing great things for hundreds of thousands of customers, but they seem to be covering someone else, right? And we had to get over that at some point.
And did that kind of fuel your fire as well to make it even more successful in a way?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because someone asked me a few months ago, like, why do you want to be successful? And it took me a little bit of time to think about it. And what it really came down to is I wanted to prove people wrong. In that, I struggled in school. I was way behind in reading. I had to go to a tutor 4 days a week just to get on par with my, class, right? And to me, like being successful was always just to prove people like, look, I can do this. No one assumed that I could. No one thought I could.
I love that, because in order to build a company and bootstrap for 12 years, you have to have some pretty deep, strong reasons. You can't just say, I want to make some money. So it's good that you kind of kept those reasons at the forefront of your mind. And it reminds people, if you don't have strong enough reasons to wake up in the morning that really are compelling, it's easier to give up. Did you have, throughout the journey, obviously there's always thoughts of giving up when you build a company that big. Was it just not a question for you because you put so much work into it? Or did you have a great team around you that wouldn't let you give up? What was the thought process when you thought about giving up and you're like, I just want to do something that doesn't take as much pressure? Was there any of that?
I think there's two things. One is like we were tremendously proud about what we were doing, right? Like we didn't like the service we provided at Grasshopper was a virtual phone system for entrepreneurs, which we didn't necessarily care about that. We cared about serving entrepreneurs, and we had
talk about what that is though. Talk about the press one for this, because you guys kind of like reinvented that.
Yeah, so I mean, it was this press 1 for sales, 2 for support, on hold music, transferring, all of those things, totally virtual, right? And we were very early in this space. Lots of people do this today. We started before there was voice over IP. But like, were we passionate about that? Not really. Like, it was okay, right? We were passionate about who we served, which was entrepreneurs and hundreds of thousands of them, and being able to communicate with them. So like that stopped us from giving up, one. I think the other thing is just from a pure logical standpoint, like I had nothing else, right? Like any wealth I had generated was only in this business, right? And giving up meant like I'd have to start over at zero. So there's kind of this driving force that balances things out and says like, yeah, it's tough, but I do love what I'm doing. And this is the only wealth I've built in my life. So I kind of have to continue at it, right? And some people think that that's negative. I think it's actually really positive, right? Like you need that additional driving force to remind you, because there's big ups and downs, huge ups and downs.
You talked about something, and everyone I've talked to, David, that sold a company for a large lump sum, they were all in on it, but also they had a problem that they solved that they were dealing with themselves. I've seen that a lot. So if you I see a lot of younger entrepreneurs, they're chasing different businesses to trends to like buy and sell quick. But you have to almost solve a problem that pissed you off in a way. So talk about how you kind of came up with the Grasshopper philosophy and the idea, because you said it frustrated you and you wanted to build a business to solve the problem you were having. I see that commonly in a lot of businesses that sold for a lot of money. So it's interesting.
Yeah, so for sure, that's how we got to what we decided to build, which was me and my business partner both had run other companies, and we had this common challenge, like we needed people to be able to call us, and we had our cell phone or whatever it was, and it was just a crappy solution. Even our home phone, right? Like your mom picking up the phone sucks, right? If you're trying to portray a professional image. And we went out and looked, and there was just nothing available. So I think the reason that you see success in people that solve their own problem is because you can have conviction behind it, right? If I say, I'm going to build this thing for doctors, and I'm not a doctor, like maybe the opportunity is huge. Maybe it's a great market. Maybe I can sell it, right? Like all those things are possible, but I can't have conviction that what I'm building is the right thing. So for us, we just had that deep conviction. Like we knew every step of the way, like I want this to work this way.
I've seen lack of conviction kill companies. I've seen it firsthand, where it's like, oh, let's jump to the next thing that we're not fully convicted in, right?
Let's pivot again and pivot and pivot. And I hate the word. Like you just have to have some conviction and do something.
Huge. So you've started multiple companies, a couple that have became massive, Return Path and Grasshopper. They're both different. And I believe that one was VC money, right? And one you started completely bootstrapped, like no money from outside investors. I kind of want to dive into that topic as a following split. Some think you have to raise money. Others think you can do it by yourself. Can you run through the pros and cons of both paths and maybe your experience comparing the two? I think that'd be super valuable for our entrepreneurs.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's one key point is that when we started Return Path, it was a very different time. This was, kind of the early internet boom in New York, when, things were going crazy before the crash. And it was harder to do things. There was not AWS. So to me, that is a very different time period than today. And my thought process around today is the vast majority, like 99% of people do not need to raise money and shouldn't raise money. Right? From an entrepreneur's perspective, it takes away optionality, it takes away power, it also takes away equity, right? And if you're building something to be able to make it a great thing, equity is very important, not just from a cash perspective, but from a control perspective. So when I look at it today, like I recommend almost no one raise money and get to, if it's $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, some reasonable amount of traction. And then look at financing options, because at that point, the options are wide. It could be revenue-based financing, it could be debt financing.
You're proven.
It could be all sorts of things, right? And you have the power to decide.
Why is there a trend though, with a lot of startups and a lot of young entrepreneurs, that their first focus is raising money? Like that's a trend I see. Why, where do you think that stems from?
I think it just stems from the media coverage, right? Like the same challenge that we had, which is funded companies get coverage. So those are the ones we hear about. So we assume everyone's doing it that way. Actually, the vast majority of small businesses in the United States have no funding, right? And then if you parse that out and look at like entrepreneurs, which I think is a different segment than small businesses, right? Because a dry cleaner is different than someone who's trying to build and scale something. Still, the vast majority don't take funding. But we hear about the ones that do, right? The Uber and the Airbnb.
And we have the Shark Tank and everything. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's just that image. And hopefully that's starting to change. So I've started to work with some funds that care about companies that have kind of built on their own and look for alternative funding mechanisms outside of typical VC. Indie VC, Earnest Capital. There's a few others that I'm involved in that all have this same mentality of like, how do we do this differently?
I like it. That's a huge thing to understand and conceptualize if you're listening and watching, is you don't need to raise money, and that shouldn't be your first focus. And I like how scrappy you've been. Hit on the importance of just getting, like you said, your first million or the first couple sales, starting that feedback loop of your product and service to obviously your market's going to tell you how your product is. So I'd love to hear about your experience and thoughts on kind of the importance of that beginning execution and that feedback loop of customer service and customers telling you what's good and bad and things like that. Because obviously you probably weren't perfect at the beginning, but you've perfected it.
Yeah, so we were never perfect at anything. We got better at things, but most importantly, like I care about paying customers and their feedback. And we made this mistake at one of our other companies, Chargify, where we had a bunch of free customers and we listened to their feedback, and it got us into a lot of trouble. They were the loudest people making the biggest complaints about things that were stupid and useless, right?
And they got it free.
And exactly, right? And we paid attention because it was the loudest group and the biggest group. And it was a tremendous mistake. So I care about paying customers that have committed with dollars, and then they give feedback, right? Because now we're both on the same level, on the same game, right? And that's why, like, I encourage people to get to that, whatever traction means in your industry or business. To me, I use kind of the $1 million mark as like that. It's an easy mark to point to, right?
Yep.
And say like, that means like there's enough customers that care about this, that are willing to pay on a regular basis, no matter what model you're building on, to now say like, what do I do next? How do I scale to the next level?
What's your take on hiring too? Because there's some gray area between their first 7 figures, getting from 200-300K to $1 million. Do I do it all myself? When do I hire? When do I invest back in my business? Obviously there's different ways, but I'd love to get your philosophy on when you hire somebody. Is it when it's not your strength, or what's kind of your philosophy on hiring and scaling?
So I think before $1 million, I want to do everything myself first, even if it's for a short period of time, before I hire someone into that position. Because there's a tremendous amount of waste that happens if I've never done customer service and I go look for a customer service person. I don't know the right person to, like, it could be a tremendously relationship-based customer service. It could be transactional. Like, I don't know unless I've been doing and experience it. Right. So before $1 million, I want to experience all of those functions myself before hiring and really know what I'm hiring for. And pre $1 million, like the people you're hiring are mostly what I consider doers, right? Which is, hey, Peter, go do this for me and come back when you're done, right? After $1 million is when you start the shift and the progression towards people that are telling you what to do, right? Which is, hey, we have this overarching goal, and they come to you and say, David, hey, what we should be doing is these 3 things. I'm going to start with number 1, and I'll come back to you when number 1 is done, right? And that's a progression over time as the company continues to scale. But I think those are the beginnings of the breakpoints.
Interesting. So over $1 million, you now are hiring people in a sense smarter than you that know that specific area.
Yeah, and they're willing to step up and take responsibility and ownership, which is different than being assigned a task, finishing a task, and giving it back.
I have a question for Matt, who's actually in position to sell his company and has built an amazing company. And you said you didn't have an exact exit strategy, but he wants to know, when selling or positioning your business for sale, is there any key things that you kept in mind or keep in mind, or that you would share? Any advice as far as don't do's or make sure you do this? Is there anything that you've learned that maybe you would have done differently, or things that you did that made the value higher?
Yeah, what was most interesting for us was we operated the business as if it would going to be sold, meaning all of the procedures and operations, from how we ran accounting and how we were strict on spending and only spending on growth, to P&L and all of these other things that an acquirer cares about and increases value because it eases the whole transition. So we ran a very tight operation, from how we communicated goals to P&L to accounting to everything, right? So when people ask me, like, you should run your business all the time as if it is going to be sold, right? Because those are the things that acquirers care about, where when they come into a business that's not run that way, it's a mess, right? And it takes time and effort, and then it raises concern. They're like, uh-oh, if this is a mess, what else is a mess? I don't know. And it just starts to question things. The other piece I think that's important is speed and time, right? So we were told this again and again by people, which is the biggest killer to any deal is just time. So the faster you can go through the process, the better, because you never know what will kill a deal, right? And we found out after the deal was done that we were literally 2 weeks away from the deal being dead, because an activist investor sent in a letter saying, divest all of your interests in anything but virtualization at Citrix. So that means all of your SaaS businesses, right? And like, that was an external factor. We couldn't control it. The acquisition team couldn't control it, but that could have happened, right? And so you have to be pushing towards that close on a regular basis. And then the other 2 pieces I think to think about from a value perspective are, how can I drive cost savings in the acquirer, right? So where can they save money? And unfortunately, you only get like a 1x multiple on this, right? So if I can save $1 million, it's roughly worth $1 million, right? So that's one piece, but it's valuable. It's a way to generate value. The other piece is, how can I increase upside? How can I cross-sell, upsell, or increase what the acquirer sells to their customers? This is worth far more, right? Because at scale, this goes up very exponentially, right?
3x minimum, right? 3x plus.
Yeah, right. So, and as the company gets bigger, it becomes more valuable. So like, this is a bigger sell. Those are the 2 key factors an acquirer will pay for, outside of strategic like advantage, access to a market quickly, and things you can't change or control.
You guys should thank him for adding value to your company instantly right there. I appreciate your time, man. Is there any last words of advice for, if you're in an arena, you're speaking to like 1,000 driven young entrepreneurs, maybe even speaking to your younger self when you're 18, 19 years old? Is there anything you can tell them before leaving that they can take action on or ponder on before heading out?
Yeah, I'll give you 2 things. One, you talked about books. So I have this amazing tool that I built for books, because my challenge with books was I could always find things about topics that I wanted to read. However, I didn't know like, what are the best books to read. So I built this spreadsheet that took all of the best recommendations of books. Like, so every guest that was on Tim Ferriss, like I compiled all that, like lots and lots of lists. And I said, find me the duplication across these lists to find the best books. Right. It's awesome, because at the top, it just filters and said, these are the books that have recommended by at least 5 people. right? And I just started prioritizing. I'm like, I'm just going to start going down a list. And I found some of the greatest books that way.
Interesting. Is that a tool that you share, or is that something?
Yeah, it's on unstoppablebook.com. It's linked there. It's a Google spreadsheet that anyone can access.
Wow, that's a no-brainer.
I love using it. And I've discovered books like Sapiens and Evolution of Everything, Enlightenment Now, some really great books that I otherwise would not have read. And I'll get you the direct link to that too. So the other piece is, to me, the most important thing today is just doing something. I run into so many entrepreneurs at every stage. It doesn't matter if you're at 0 or you're at 100 million. Like, there's lots of talk and not enough doing. So I think what gets people ahead today is doing something small, one step forward, again and again and again. Otherwise, we're just talking about bullshit.
Love it, man. Well, I appreciate you, and not just for what you've built, but who you've become, and for being a role model to entrepreneurs. Even if you haven't tried to be, what you've done, what you've built, how you're living, and the legacy you're creating is admirable, man. So much respect to you. I appreciate you for all you've done and for taking time to speak to our academy. Let me know if there's anything I can do personally to help you out, man. And much respect. I appreciate you. Thanks from everybody.
Thanks for having me and taking the time. And I love doing stuff like this. It's what I get energy from. So I appreciate it.
I'm excited to get it out there, man, and add a lot of value to a lot of people. So I appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, you too.
Hey, what's up? And thank you for watching this video. If you enjoy this video and this content, make sure you hit the subscribe button below, put the notifications on, and I assure you, you'll love this content and these videos.